Hello, and welcome to the first episode of the Strange Water podcast. I'm your host, Rex, but you might know me as Haim Salomon from Twitter, Discord, or anywhere else this community congregates. I'm super excited to have you here as we figure out how to create a podcast together. And we'll have some very exciting ideas for this show. I don't want to give away too much yet. So let me say this. Strange Water will be a platform that elevates the voices of all the people that are building and building on top of the world computer, and really for anybody that wants to learn more about Ethereum. In this first episode, I wanted to go back to basics. What is Ethereum, and why should we care? And so, I called an old friend from my pre-crypto days and asked him if I could explain. One final note, please don't take financial advice from this or any podcast. Ethereum will change the world, but you can easily lose all your money in the process. And with that, once again, just wanted to thank you for joining us, and I hope you enjoy the episode. Today I want to try to crypto pill or Ethereum pill someone. And for this experience, I've brought one of my very close friends from actually even before I started my professional career, Chris. And, you know, instead of giving my long-winded speech about all the things that we've done together, Chris, why don't you just jump in, introduce yourself, and let the community know who you are.
Yeah, thanks. Happy to be here. My name is Chris Chauvin, and yeah, I think Rex, our first encounter was probably 2013, maybe 2012, right? So
Yeah.
I was at the time I was with Anheuser-Busch, roughly my second year with the company. Joined the innovation team, and I was out in the Bay Area working at the beer garage. So their little incubator that's out there, and went to the Stanford information session, and you and I crossed paths. I think you were interested in their trainee program, and I had just come out of that program, and so yeah, I think at the time we were kind of, probably didn't realize how much we were going to work together, and how good of friends we were going to become. But yeah, you fortunately for us joined the company, and I think our paths came back together again when we were both in St. Louis, and then yet again when we were in New York. So we're just kind of following each other here across the country.
Yeah, man, it's pretty wild, like the way the world turns out. For everyone listening at home, if you are like familiar with Sriram Kannan in Eigenlayer, he came from University of Illinois Champaign, and like my biggest like crazy moment talking to Sriram was realizing that like the University of Illinois Champaign, which is like so instrumental in so much of this like technology and like this like really hard science stuff, is where I spent like what 3 or 4 times a year, like coming out to hang out with Chris while he was in charge of like what did we call it? The Bud Lab
The Bud Lab,
at University of Illinois Champaign. So
yet another
it
one
is
of
just
our
like
incubation centers. Yeah.
yeah, man, it's so crazy, and I think why just like real briefly, because this is not the point of this conversation, but like, do you want to just like talk to the folks at home like at why like people like you and me were working for this like super old industry, like trying to figure out what we can do at in Palo Alto, what we can do at research parks.
Yeah, I mean, it's a go back to 2010 when I first joined Anheuser-Busch, and they were very much sort of a behemoth, but a legacy company in the CPG space. So they had a lot of traditional ways of working across the board. At the time, the CEO, Carlos Brito, I think he was quite visionary. And he, having come out of Stanford, had a lot of great relationships there. And I think he recognized the value of innovation. He was following a lot of the Jim Collins, content, and too big to fail and so on. And he was trying to really apply that thinking to Anheuser. And so he made that initial investment to go and put the beer garage and this sort of innovation center in the valley, and then it sort of expanded from there. And fast forward a couple of years, and we've started to realize the opportunity that some of these startups or bleeding edge companies could bring to a big traditional company. Think of like last mile logistics and the Ubers of the world and so on. Like, how do you apply that 10, 15 years ago to a company that is, almost entirely anchored and rooted in distribution. And so, yeah, eventually then the next big thing was data, right? Data is the new oil. And so there was a big bet that they made at the University of Illinois, and they created the Bud Lab, which was the data center. So I got to go and run that for a couple of years, and it was the same thing, right? It was how do we not only leverage, big data or just the vast wealth of information that we had at our fingertips, but it was also through the lens of innovation. So it's all about net new capabilities. How do we reduce our dependency on some of these outside companies that are helping us do like demand forecasting and so on, and how do you in-house it?
Mhm.
And then again, the leadership at the time, they were very forward looking and thinking, and they were also looking for monetization opportunities. And so, I think at the time you're sort of trying to piece it all together and figure out, what am I going to do? How is this going to really impact the company? But I think now, if you look at where Anheuser-Busch is, and where they are in terms of D2C and B2B, and there's a lot of sort of AI and big data based capabilities that are part of the core business model. So, yeah, kudos to them. They were bleeding edge.
Yeah. No, and so just like to kind of wrap that up in a bow, like, sorry, I'm cheating because I had the same job as you here, but like basically you would say that like it was our job to like go figure out how technology was changing, right? And figure out what transformational things that were happening out in Silicon Valley or at Urbana-Champaign or wherever, and like figure out how that was going to transform this like 150-year-old beer company that was like literally still using magnetic tape, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And and so okay, cool. Yeah, I mean, so like that was our job, and that's like how Chris and I know each other. And so like that, and like for those of you following along at home, right? The era that we're talking about is specifically, let's say, 2010 to 2020, right? Which for all of us on the crypto side of the line, like recognize that as like some of like the era in which crypto like transformed into this niche internet project into something that like could have applications outside of speculation. And so I guess like my question to you is like during this time or like in the time after, like do you feel like crypto was something that was like even relevant to like Anheuser-Busch or the companies that you worked for after in terms of like a technology that could help with these kinds of problems, or like from your perspective was this just like something super out of left field that would show up in the news every time like Mount Gox was hacked or whatever?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, I would say the first memory that I have of, let's say, Bitcoin being referenced with Anheuser and some of the professional opportunities there. A colleague of ours was putting that forward as, an alternative to sales reps going account by account, collecting cash. There were, safety benefits. There were, the benefits tied to avoiding transaction fees and so on. So I think at the time we didn't recognize the potential, we didn't recognize the opportunity, and it felt maybe too small, too early at the time. I think later, this is probably less functional and more PR and consumer friendly, but I know the value of blockchain and sort of understanding end to end the procurement of raw materials and kind of where those ingredients in your Budweiser came from, and it was fun for storytelling. But yeah, I mean, I would say really limited potential was our early take on this thing.
Yeah.
And yeah, so and I think even now, it certainly feels like maybe it's embedded in services that either Anheuser uses or now that I'm at Keurig that we use. But yeah, I still think there's a lot of like, what do we do with this thing?
Yeah. No, so I mean, I guess like, do you, what do you think when you hear like either Bitcoin or Ethereum, right? Like, what in your head, like, is this like even a concrete like idea that has applications that aren't there yet? Or like, do you even have an understanding of what this is?
Yeah, there's a lot that I don't understand.
Yeah.
Admittedly, I think the first thing that pops into my mind is like investing asset, right? Or it's
Yeah.
an investment
Great
vehicle.
idea.
If you were in at the right time, if you were an early adopter, life is looking pretty good right now for you.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think, and then again, there's probably some of those stereotypical, like classical functional use cases that we were talking about, with the sort of smart contract aspect of it. But I would say by and large, I don't have a deep and full understanding of it. And I certainly,
Yeah.
I've dabbled in some of it personally speaking, but I've never really gone deep.
Cool. Very cool. Very good place to start. Let me just like start by saying like I think there's like two ways you can understand crypto. Like one is from like the very traditional sense of like there's something about like scarcity and digital store of value and gold and economics and like hard money, something like Bitcoin, right? And then like there's another approach to looking at it, which is like through the lens of computer science. And like what I'll say is like almost the everybody talks about it through this like economic lens, and like I think everyone doesn't understand it because of that. So like let's like rewind to 2009, right? Like when Bitcoin is like first getting started. And like think at the super basic level, like what really is Bitcoin? Like all it is a super simple application that has like balances, names. And like all the application can do is like transfer from this balance to this balance. Right? Super simple list of names, list of balances, and like this ability to add or subtract. It's like essentially like kind of a bad calculator, but with memory. The cool thing about Bitcoin is that like there is one instance of like the Bitcoin record, right? Whether it's like the software is running on my computer, on your computer, on like some guy in China's computer, all of the records will match exactly the same. And like the Bitcoin software and what proof of work is like the ability for all of these different computers to update their program like completely synchronously, but without like trusting each other. So does that make sense?
It does. Yep. They're all validating each other, right?
Well, it's not even, yeah, like they're all validating each other, but more so it's like there's no like central source of truth that is like the Bitcoin state. It is like the Bitcoin state exists within the actual computer that's running Bitcoin, and it's an exact copy of every other Bitcoin state. Like there's only one Bitcoin state. And like what proof of work is the ability for all of these different computers to sync their state like trustlessly.
Got it.
And so we can like we'll talk later about what like trustlessly means, but like the most important thing to realize is that like Bitcoin is just simply a computer program that is like run synchronously across thousands and thousands of computers trustlessly. Clear?
Clear. Let me ask maybe a silly question, right? So you're mentioning this
Yeah.
idea of decentralized, makes sense. How do you reconcile that with
Hmm.
like the linear pathway, right? So it originates somewhere, right?
Hmm.
And then there's sort of a progression from one to the next to get through that verification or validation process, right? How do you reconcile like that linear relationship with the fact that it is decentralized?
So so I understand your question, what you're saying is that like yes, like if you take it for granted that it's decentralized, like that makes sense. But the fact is, it has to start with like a single like computer using it, and
Exactly.
therefore like the original sin is centralization.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, wow. This is like why I really wanted to talk to someone outside of our world because I don't think I've ever heard somebody ask that before. But I think like I th- so to quickly answer your question, what it really comes down to is like how we define this word trustlessness. And like what trustlessness really comes down to is that like you know what's going to happen based on computer code. You don't have to trust that like different actors in the system are going to do things that are like according to the rules. And so like when Bitcoin was originally mined, yes, like the first Bitcoin had to go to someone, or like the first set of the first Bitcoin network was just a very small centralized group of people. But like we in this industry are okay with like the idea that one thing is happening if it's happening in a way that is like auditable by like everyone independently. And then like rabbit trail for later, but like that opens up this whole question where it's like, okay, if everything is verifiable by like by checking the code, like the problem is that nobody knows how to check code. And so then you're like relying on trust, and that like you're saying like, okay, these developers who say they're not associated say that it's trustworthy, and I trust them. So, but we'll deal with that later.
Yeah.
But bottom line is like where we start is that like where man, this is such a good question, such an important question, because like the story of Bitcoin. I don't know if you know this, but do you know when the Bitcoin white paper was released?
I don't.
It was in 2008, like during the financial crisis, while all of the like banks and AIG and everyone was being bailed out.
Interesting.
And so the like one of like the most important insights of like the Bitcoin or the crypto industry is if there is a system that is manipulatable by someone, like there is going to become a moment of crisis that person is in a dire straits where they're going to abuse the system to like save it. And like we can have like, you know, moral conversations about if saving the system is good or bad, but like the reality is that like if this power exists, it will be used.
Yeah.
And so what Bitcoin is saying is not only can we have this calculator that has one set of data across every single computer, but like we know that like no person has like control over it. Is that,
Yeah.
have I already lost you in the?
No, you haven't. You haven't. It makes sense. And I'm like very functional in my thinking. Because again, I've got a very simplified view and understanding of it. And I'm thinking, you know, if I'm someone and I want to start a contract, right? So let's go back to the traceability thing, right? Which is probably one of the more common use cases for a lot of these like traditional like CPG companies, right?
Yeah, for
Uh,
sure. Yeah.
right. So you know, from the moment, so in the beer world, right, I'm sourcing my grain, you know, I don't know where it would start in the process, but let's just say at you know some part in the sourcing there, someone's going to say, right, this came from this farm in northern Idaho, right? And like so there's a point of origination that then has to get sort of shared down. So yeah, it makes sense, and that's sort of what that's in my mind where I was going. Is like, you know, when you're using this thing functionally, there's sort of like a starting point and an ending point, and yet the whole thing reconciling that with decentralization is still like pretty far out there for me.
One of like I'll kind of get to this like punchline a little bit later, but like one of the best ways to understand like what crypto is just like part of the very like clear linear development of the internet, right? Or more specifically, like the clear linear development of like mass communications technology. And like we can go all the way back to like the 1400s and talk about Gutenberg, but like just for the sake of all of our sanities, like, you know, like we'll go like radio to like TV to like being able to share like over the internet, like just to think that like we basically made it to Facebook and then innovation stopped, and after that it was like better and better UX and not even better, right? But like that's obviously like not how things work. Like the next thing that happens after we share like first video, audio, like information is like we need to be able to share property across the internet. And so like why I bring up like the analogy to the internet is because like when you think about the internet as a whole, like it is decentralized. Like imagine if you could get every president in the room together and like convince them that like we need to shut off the internet, the internet. Right? Like it actually physically isn't possible because like even if you like go after all like the big backbone nodes, like all of these computers are so interconnected in a way that like the people that want to get on the internet will still always have a path to get there.
Yeah.
And so like that is kind of like the model of these like crypto systems where like the whole point, whether it first is Bitcoin then Ethereum, is to build this like the big word is credibly neutral, right? This credibly neutral infrastructure that like does what it does, like North Korea can use it just the same as Mother Teresa can use it. But like the point is that like it's there to be used in a way that like can't be abused, right?
Yeah.
So let's like continue on. We'll get back to like why all this is important in a second, right? But so we have Bitcoin, right? Decentralized network of calculator, calculator with accounts, right? And so like the next obvious question is, if our decentralized computer can add and subtract, can't we just make it a general purpose computer, right? Like, and this concept is a concept called Turing complete, named after Alan Turing from I'm sure at any point somebody like Imitation Game is a movie about him, but the point of a Turing machine is that you can mathematically prove that anything that a Turing machine can execute, any other Turing machine can execute. So if you're able to like build a system and show that it's a Turing machine, then you can show that any program that you could conceivably imagine can be run on that machine. And so we can talk about why Bitcoin didn't just directly evolve into this, as it should have. Let me be clear, Bitcoin maxis, you fucked up. Bitcoin is just like the proof of concept that we can have decentralized computing as a like addition and subtraction. Ethereum is that transition to generalized computing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I mean,
Are you
I'm
tracking?
following, and yeah, and I think the again outsider view, not as as close to all of the nuances of this, but it's interesting, right? As we think about, or as you explain, sort of the evolution from Bitcoin as proof of concept, basic calculator, moving now into Ethereum. There's much more potential, much more upside, going away from maybe a basic use case, which is store of value, and yet at least from my perspective, most of the conversation, most of um, the context, right, is still value based.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think the problem is like there are maybe like 400 people that are working on building like out the infrastructure layer of Ethereum, and like those are the people that understand like why we're doing this and like what this can kind of enable. And like before we get to the end of the pod, like I really want to like paint that picture for you. But I think that like outside of this world, and even within this world, it's just like it's so dense and it's so opaque, and like 99.9% of the people in this space are actually trying to scam you, that like it's just like it's totally lost. And like I would love for a different time to just hear like your experience of like what 2022 was for crypto, and just like as you like we all know that like our just chaos and like ridiculousness like leaked out into the normal world, but like I I just can't even imagine trying to interpret what's going on here without even like having basic understanding of like why we would bother with this technology in the first place.
Right, right, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's and I think you and I talked about this a little bit before that I've got a basic view of it for me, until I can tangibly uh, apply an alternative use case. I mean, NFTs is interesting, right? It still for me feels very trendy and buzzy, and at the time, to your
Yeah.
point, it's like you're buying and you're selling art. I'm sure there's inherent value there and actually having the NFT, but it's like, okay, I can go and I can create my own copy. And it's like, unless I'm going to turn around and actually sell the thing or make a transaction, then it's like the copy's fine. So there's, for me, I, looked beyond all of that. But yeah, from a financial perspective, right, looking for alternative asset classes and so on, I certainly played in it. I saw the volatility. I got nervous, right? Because you get FOMO, right? I want to be a crypto billionaire. Pretty pleased, wouldn't we all? And yeah, so I played with it, and my parents are asking me about it. Should we get in? And then and I'm just like, no, don't. But yeah, but then, and then I jumped out, and so I'm always all sort of on the outside looking in. Casually, trying to better
Yeah.
understand this thing and how I use it in my everyday. How is it helping me?
Like everything that's going on in crypto is about like technology infrastructure. And like when I think of like what the closest analogy for Ethereum will be is like HTTP. I think that's what we're building. And I think that like all of the thing I love to say, all the companies that we see today, it's like, imagine if it was 2003, you're at Harvard, and I walked up to you and I was like, Chris, this is the pitch deck for Facebook. Here's $1 billion. And that kid over there, Mark Zuckerberg, he's going to work for you. Here's the only problem. HTTP, it's not done yet. All we have for HTTP is that you can send one emoji at a time. That's the only way to communicate over the internet. Good luck. How are you going to build it?
Yeah,
you know?
exactly.
And so like that is like very much like the world we're in right now. And like some people are doing some interesting things that like may or may not have staying power. But like I encourage you to think about like looking at what's going on in crypto and thinking like, okay, this is literally the same thing that was going on like when GeoCities was being created and everything there was like all like crazy and like kind of racist and like maybe there's some Nazi things, but like that kind of like spawned the thing that led to MySpace and this and like that's like the chaos that we're in. The difference between what happened last time and this time is that like because of what crypto is, you can start to own ownership in these like protocol layers. And like, you know, you can gain some financial upside on that, or you can like lose a bunch of money in that.
Yeah, and I'm going to say something again, not fully informed, but I think from my basic understanding, I think one of the interesting things about Ethereum is it is not the asset class in and of itself. It's not the store of value like a Bitcoin, but rather it's a platform enabling other things, which potentially brings much more upside and much more potential. I say that without having full appreciation for it, but I do have that basic understanding that it's an enabler of other things. It's not the thing in and of itself.
Exactly. Wait, so let's talk about that, right? So what you're referring to is what I was referring to as like Ethereum is Turing complete, right? It is a platform that enables like basically anyone to deploy their own like computer program onto it to run, and like that can like hopefully generate more value, like value that is like not only specific to that application, but will also feed back to Ethereum, right? And so like let's like talk about what that actually means, right? So what Ethereum is I literally have a computer running in my fiance's closet that is like running the piece of software that is an Ethereum client. And so within that Ethereum client, it is like the internal part of that is like literally it's just a computer. All it is a computer that has like the same thing as your MacBook, just like architected, in a different way, but is capable of doing everything as your MacBook. And then on top of it, it's there's a second piece of software. It's called a consensus client. And like what this does is like coordinates with every other Ethereum node to like make sure that your Ethereum computer is synced with every other one. And so like that's how it works. The consensus client is the thing that runs proof of stake. And so we can talk about what proof of stake is, but essentially proof of stake is just what's coordinating these things. And so the way that Ethereum works is like, I'll be the node operator. I have the node in here. Like, Chris, let's say that you want to send me some money. Like what you do is you create essentially like an instruction to the world computer that says, this is Chris. I want to send 1 ETH to Rex, and this is my signature. And then you're going to send it to any of the Ethereum nodes. You could send it to mine. You could send it to like anyone's. And the first thing that'll happen is all the Ethereum nodes will socialize your request, so everyone sees the request. Then it'll be like one Ethereum node's turn to progress the computer, and that's called a block proposal. And like the whole thing with blocks and blockchain is a block is just like one unit of these transactions or these like instructions for the world computer to execute. And so, sorry, this is getting long-winded, but there's a point to this. So when you, Chris, will send your instruction to the world computer, and then in order for the world computer to actually execute your instructions, like you need to send some gas. And what gas is is like gas is this fictitious unit of account that all it does is like measure the computational effort of like the transaction that you sent. So like, let's say like sending ETH, super, super simple. Let's say like doing like a complex like loan and then flat, like all this like derivative stuff, very, very complicated. Like,
So would you say it's like a transaction fee that is proportionate to the amount of work required?
yeah, the computational work.
The
Exactly,
computation?
exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And yes, exactly, exactly. And so like the whole purpose of this apparatus is that like by limiting the amount of gas available per block, you are like setting the minimum like the amount of computation that a computer needs to run Ethereum.
Okay. Now, let me ask you another newbie question.
Yeah.
So, if if the gas is the transaction fee, in quotes,
Yeah.
proportionate to the computational effort,
Yep.
you were describing, right? The fact that it's decentralized and it's going to sort of go through the network.
Mhm.
Is there inherent inefficiency in that?
What you're asking is basically, is it inefficient to first send the transaction to one node, have it distribute it, and then like, so that is inefficient, but that is like inherent in decentralization because the problem is that like let's say that you sent your transaction directly to me and I didn't have to socialize it. If I'm like, oh, like let's say it's not you. Let's say it's like an Iranian and I'm the U.S. government, and I might see like, oh, an Iranian just tried to send money, not interested, and I might choose not to like move on your transaction.
Okay.
So the Ethereum system like forces the nodes to like communicate all of the pending transactions before like you go into this execution phase.
Okay. Got it. So it's less efficient, but it's the nature of the beast in that there's inherent value in being decentralized.
Yeah, and actually like that is the most important equation of crypto, which is like inherently the less efficient something is, the more decentralized something is. And like the easiest way to understand this is like, so again, we're saying that gas is like the amount of computation that is like available per block, right? Per unit of time. If you increase the amount of gas per block, what that means is your computer needs to be more and more powerful to be able to execute that whole thing within that amount of time. And the more powerful you make it, the more like the less likely like hobbyists like myself are going to be able to participate, and the more likely it's literally just going to be Amazon, Facebook, Google, governments.
Got it.
And so like you're completely right to recognize that like a lot of the things that we're talking about don't seem like they're like execution focused systems, and like that's because they're not. The thing that they're optimizing for is like making sure that like literally people using Raspberry Pis in Africa can participate in this system.
Got it.
Because like yeah, and we can, yeah. So the so hopefully that's clear.
Yeah, it's clear. And again, there's a whole nother tangent we can go down where,
Yeah.
I think, you were saying proof of work on Bitcoin, and I know that uh, because of the computational workload, there's a big environmental play, right? And so
Yeah.
I think, the proof of work, and now it's proof of stake or proof of is it proof of stake or proof of value as the
Proof of
alternative?
stake.
Proof
Yeah,
of stake.
yeah, there's lots of like different offshoots. So we'll get to proof of stake in 1 second, but the important thing is like, okay, so gas is um yeah, so gas is like this measure of like computation, and like the by like capping gas at a relatively low amount, that is like how we ensure that Ethereum remains decentralized.
Yeah.
And then like you can kind of now see how this whole system works. Whereas like in order to participate, like users like you and me have to like send both like the thing that we want to get done plus like the fee that we're willing to pay to get it done. And so like that is the system. Ultimately, like there is this like decentralized, credibly neutral like property layer that exists in the background. If you want to use it, you pay to use it, and it's that simple. Now the problem is that if you want to use it, you pay to use it. If lots of people want to use it, the prices like adjust to reflect that and go up. And so like the net result is like the more popular that Ethereum and Bitcoin, but the more popular that Ethereum gets, like the more expensive it is to use it. And like it kind of like breaks down the whole purpose. And like the best example of this is like there are times when it can become like $300 or $400 just to send Ethereum or like send a stable coin from one person to another. And like if we're talking about like an alternate to the like the current financial system, which you know like Western Union will charge you $40 to send cash across the country, but our system costs you $200 or $300, like what are we even talking about here, right?
Right, right.
So like that is like kind of the problem of Ethereum in like 2018, 2019. And like that is what created like all of this like explosion of different blockchains like Solana, like Avalanche, all these other things that you probably heard of. That like are not, that are like smaller but seem like trendy and hype, are essentially they're looking at Ethereum and saying this is a good idea, but it's just like way too slow. Let's like re-implement this on supercomputers.
Got it.
And so like Avalanche, Solana, all of these, they're basically doing the exact same thing that Ethereum is doing, but they're running on like between like 1 and 20 computers that are like owned by the companies that founded them.
Got it.
And the problem
Is
with
there,
that is,
no, just
go
again,
ahead.
sorry, silly question, but for these
Yeah.
alternatives that are sort of based on Ethereum, are they actually fundamentally different in any way, or is it just like almost like a white labeling of an existing
Okay, so if you were to ask like people as part of those communities, like if they're different and if they like are really doing something in a way that um, will like displace Ethereum, like they have answers for that. Like my personal opinion is like it's pretty hard to look at anything that we in our industry call an alternative L1 or an alt L1 and see it as anything other than like a cash grab by like people that understand that everyone watched Ethereum like 2000x, the 20,000x, and like want to kind of capitalize on all the people that have like FOMO and are looking for the next one.
Got
So
it.
like I'm super bearish and like super skeptical of like basically anything that's not Ethereum.
Got it.
So yeah, and basically yeah, again, the way that these other companies have like decided to like address the Ethereum scaling problem is like, all right, fuck it, like we're just gonna like make the computers like operate like modern computers, and then we'll like figure out decentralization on the back end. The way that Ethereum is dealing with decentralization is like by just like totally embracing, or sorry, is dealing with scaling, is by totally embracing the trade-off that we talked about earlier, where the slower something is, the more decentralized something is. And so what Ethereum is doing is saying the Ethereum base chain, like ETH, that will always be super slow, like super slow and super expensive. The idea is like that will become like the background layer that like most people will never even see. Like that's not even HTTP. That's like TCP IP or like that UDP. That's like something that like no one has ever even heard of before. And then on top of Ethereum, we have these things called layer twos or rollups. And essentially what they do is provide like super high execution environments, like very centralized, like 1 or 6 computers that are like doing all the transactions on that Ethereum is capable of, and then saving a copy of those transactions to like the main slow Ethereum chain.
Got it.
And so like what this construction does is allows like all of the computation and all of like that the action to happen in these like super high performance environments that are super cheap, but like the net result of what happened will always be like saved back to the base layer, which is like uncorruptible, immutable, like not up, like doesn't have any of the centralization risks that are like normally associated with, you know, this execution.
It's interesting. This is probably like not a correct analogy, but just like as you're describing that, um, the visual that I'm getting in my mind is kind of like Docker containers almost, right? Or you have like this
Yeah.
host machine, and then you've got these like purpose-built things that are going, and instead of asking the core machine to do everything, you can containerize it all. I don't know if
That
that's
that is so incredibly right. Like, so one of like what basically how Ethereum exists today, 2 years ago, was that like everything that was happening in Ethereum like base chain, and like these smart contracts, which smart contracts, terrible name, because like people, they, sorry, this is an aside that's worth having. Whoever picked the name smart contracts was wrong, because like when you hear smart contract, your head immediately goes into this like kind of like legal frame with agreements, and like there's two parties, and maybe like this smart contract can like do this thing that we both agree to. Forget all of that. Like the way to think of what a smart contract is to first understand Ethereum as the world computer, as like, yes, each Ethereum client is like running on an individual computer, but every client is exactly synced, and so therefore looking into one is looking into any, or is looking into all, and that's the world computer. And a smart contract is simply an application that runs on the world computer. That's it. Right. In the same way that like I'm looking at my computer, I have Discord, right? Discord is an application that runs on my MacBook. A smart contract is an application that runs on the world computer.
nice. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think as you say it, it totally makes sense. Um, Never would have pieced that together. Going back to this idea that like Ethereum as the platform enabling other things. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's more clear to me than it was,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah. Okay. Two things I want to hit before we head out. So one, I want to talk to you about like why, like really why, like one, anyone would care, but like specifically like why I care so much about having like this system that is decentralized and like doesn't have this like key man risk, right? And then the other is like, okay, once Ethereum is like, once once we've upgraded our HTTP from one emoji to like the full suite, like what type of world are we looking at, right? So first, let's talk about why. So, I the classic story of like Bitcoin is like in the ashes of 2008, and it's like the reason this happened is because like the people in control of money were like basically like up until 2008 giving like money and power to all the people that were just doing like incredibly risky stuff, and then when they broke the system, the people with the money came and bailed them out, right? And so like what a lot of people think about Bitcoin is like, especially after 2020 and now this like new banking crisis that we're experiencing right now, it's like, okay, this is going to keep happening, they're going to keep picking winners and losers, like I don't want to be part of this system because like I'm probably going to be a loser. And I think like that's honestly like totally valid. um, for me it's like more personal. I have like two stories that just like make me like an Ethereum zealot. So back in 2015, I took like 2 weeks off work, and it was early in spring. Obama was signing the nuclear deal with Iran, and that week I was in Budapest with me. It was my mom and my grandmother, and when he signed it, we were on the first train of Americans to go into Iran and spend about a week there. It was one of the most incredible things I've seen in my life, and that really like opened my eyes to to the like the devastating consequences of like the way that we talk about other people and other cultures. And so, normal, like, privileged kid, like, I promptly forgot about it for 5 or 8 years, until the last year, in February, when the Russia-Ukraine war started. And so, without getting into any politics or anything, my fiance's family is like Russian, and they like still live in Moscow. And like, I'm not here to speak for them. Everyone is like struggling through this, but let me just say, like, nobody is happy about what's going on in the war. bottom line is like I over the last year have experienced firsthand like what it means to be on the wrong side of American or like reserve currency power sanctions, and like how devastating that can be to individual families' lives who have no ability to affect the war, don't want to be in a war, have no ability to stop it, to start it, to do anything at all, but just now need to deal with this. And then my other story was also last year. For things that are like totally unrelated to crypto, I got locked out of my bank accounts for from May until September, and like the net result of that was like I was totally unprepared. I didn't have any liquidity available. I ended up having to like first putting all my credit cards on minimum payments, and then taking like a 5-figure loan from my mom, and then finally missing a mortgage payment before this whole thing was resolved. And like that for me was like the radicalizing moment. Like the moment where I realized that like not only do I like not have control over my money, but like nobody cares and nobody has any sympathy. And if like something goes wrong and I need money to fix it, like you need to have access to it. And so like what crypto is like an answer to that.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting to hear like those personal experiences and stories, and I think from day one, as you were saying, right? Again, let's go back to Bitcoin, but just the fact that it's I'll call it the safe haven. I don't know if that's the right word, but it's something other than everything else.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I think like fast forward, and as this thing has really grown in popularity and awareness, um, you know, you hear a lot more about pending regulation and so on coming in.
Yeah.
I guess what are your thoughts?
I think that I think that we got this far with zero regulation because this industry, one is just it's very uncoordinated, decentralized, but two, I think it's because like we looked at the lessons of Mark Zuckerberg and like the tech 2.0 bubble, and we saw like, hey, look, like they didn't get regulated and they grew to take over the world, like, and they got so big to the point where like regulation just doesn't even like conceptually make sense anymore. Like that's how technology works. That's the path we want to follow. And I think that that was like the absolute wrong lesson to learn, like the right lesson to learn. And like, this is something that you understand more than 99.99% of people in this industry is that like you, the rules get changed by like people hustling behind the scenes, like I forget what position you were in 2017, but like Anheuser-Busch played like a major role in like the tax changes in 2017. And like it wasn't just because like we were sitting on the side and like writing thought pieces about like why regulation needed to do this X, Y, and Z. It's because like we had boots on the ground. Like we had people in Washington. We had like factories in states like that were like putting out communications about real people with real jobs, and like regulation gets shaped by industries, and like crypto has been completely absent up until like we experience an existential threat. And so I think like we're in a pretty dire situation right now. It's not good. And I think that like even if we were able to like go and find all of the senators and like convince all the senators who think the wrong things and convince them about what good regulation is and get the perfect bill drafted, like the reality of our government right now is like I do not believe we can pass a new law. And I don't know when that's going to change again. And so like I think that like again I'm more worried about things in our society like falling apart than I am for crypto, and
Yeah.
like bottom line, you can go back to like some of my older podcasts, but I say this all the time. Like I fully believe in a world where Washington just like makes it illegal to hold crypto. that totally could happen. In fact, like it might even be likely to happen. And like my response to that is like, well, I'm moving to Singapore, or I'm moving to Dubai, or I'm moving to I'm moving to Moscow. You know, like I like what is being built here is inevitable. Like I made a website called Inevitable Ethereum, which is quick plug, little wiki style website of like all my writings that like essentially boil down to my thesis that like again, this is just the natural evolution of the internet. Like we had to figure out a way to like move property through this space. And like while I'm like looking around and watching like governments don't work anymore, negotiations don't work anymore, like coordinating doesn't work anymore. Like I'm in Los Angeles, I live like near Venice Beach right now. Somehow like in the most expensive part of the country is also like the biggest homeless camps of the country. Like when I see Ethereum, it is like just like science and humanity and like people like just not relying on like these big systems that aren't working anymore and like coming together and figuring out how to make this work.
And for me, and let's say anyone else not as much in the know, I guess for those looking to drive regulation, what are the what are the top two or three things that they are anchoring in on, right? I mean, certainly when you see how much adoption is driving up the inherent price and value of this thing, and then you see people that
Yeah.
are financially gaining and benefiting from that, there's an opportunity there for them to go and jump in. But let's say above and beyond that, are there other, core pillars to their, advocacy for regulation?
I mean, so like really where regulation is right now is like super, super combative. Like there's not really, I mean, I'm sure there's people that would take offense to what I'm about to say, but it's like not really like an industry group that's like coming and advocating and like trying to like get Congress to do good legislation. Instead, it's more like reactionary people in Congress watching things like FTX, like watching things like SVB Bank and Signature Bank. SVB Bank is the wrong example, but Signature Bank like do some like things that like whether or not are actually okay, like look really, really sketch. And so like the dynamic that's going on is like the SEC and like some Congress people are like basically saying like we need to just like burn it all down, get rid of this. And then you have like kind of the crypto community like coming out like with weapons ready to defend. And so like it's very chaotic. I'd say like the big like pillars that are being argued around are one is like Ethereum and Bitcoin and coins. Are they commodities or securities? Two is like really around like the like what it means to be a stable coin, and like do you need to have reserves? Do you need to like be able to convert to like a real dollar as opposed to like other kinds of stable coins, like those kinds of things. And then there's like so much stuff around privacy and know your customer kind of stuff. So like honestly, it's like really, really boring financial stuff. And like when people always like kind of get worked up about regulation, like my opinion on it is like, look, there's like bad regulation. There's stuff that can make like it harder to start companies and to build stuff. And like ultimately, like there's regulation that would mean like the real zealots like myself are leaving the country. But 99.9% of regulation is just like straight up good. And like the reason that it's good is because it like provides the permission structure for like real businesses to enter the space and like actually build things with concrete value and not just like speculative value. And so, it's really frustrating to like talk about regulation in this space because a lot of people just like don't really understand how regulation works and what we should be hoping for. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, no, I think it's good. It's good to get your stance on it, right?
Yeah.
Because I agree. I think regulation can be good so long as it doesn't overstep, and that's the balance.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's just like the way the world works. And so like by not having it, it doesn't like create a more conducive environment. It creates like a more shadowy environment. And like the result of that,
Yeah, I would say it gives it credibility, right?
yeah,
So
for sure.
in some ways, it could support growth.
For no, I mean it definitely will. It's like let me put it this way, right? Like great example, and this is like without spilling any company secrets, but like the thing that we always used to talk about, like especially in the 2013 to 18 era at Anheuser-Busch was like, oh, are we gonna like buy a weed company, right? And it was always like, I mean, maybe like it's interesting, like obviously like share of people's leisure time is going to be eaten up, but like we're not even going to entertain this conversation until like there's regulation that makes this not a federal crime. And
Right.
so like
And the
that
social stigma and so
it
on.
like the yeah, and like again like Anheuser-Busch, right? Like as someone who is responsible for essentially transferring money between Belgium and US like 6 times a day, like crypto today could like change the game. But like they're not going to go like drop a billy on like Ethereum when like next week like the SEC could be like, okay, if you own Ethereum, that puts you like in concert with North Korea. You know, like, and so like regulation, I like very much believe is like bullish and like is the key to growth, at least in the United States.
Yeah. I mean, again, I'm you and I are friends, so no bullshit. But like, yeah, I mean, this is something where uh, I recognize the potential for this thing, but I didn't understand enough about the thing itself to act on it, right? And so I've always been passive, outside looking in. You can't be blind to this thing. I mean, every time I open up, any news app, right? There's always something going on. So it's there. It's in your face more than it's ever been, and yet it's in a lot of ways feels more out of reach than ever because again, the oversimplified price and sort of financial gain feels like that's come and gone. And so now in a lot of ways it's like more inaccessible than ever because you don't know what else there is on the surface, behind these things. So, yeah, I mean, I know I'm coming out of this, having a better understanding for it, and I think your passion for it is certainly contagious. It's a funny anecdote, right? Like I just remember this is probably like 2012, maybe. So still fairly young, fairly new in our career, and I realized I'm like, you know what? I gotta start investing. I don't know if you remember this, right? It's like I gotta start investing. So who do? I call Rex. Rex, do you do any investing? Yeah, I do investing. All right. What do you use? I use E-Trade. Yeah, whatever. So what do? I go home and like that night, I'm like in E-Trade, buying at the time, probably Apple, Amazon, some of these things. Still have it to this day. And then I remember, fast forward a couple of months, hey Rex, this E-Trade thing's going great. If you had to do it all over again, what would you do? And the next thing out of Rex's mind is, oh, there's this new thing, Betterment. It's kind of cool. I went home. I opened a Betterment account. I went all in on Betterment, right? The thing bought our house, right? So Rex is you're my go-to,
I
guru
thought
here
that
on
was
some of this
going
stuff.
the total opposite direction because like all I can do is lose my own money, so I'm glad it's working out for you.
I think it's just timing. I think
Yeah.
it's just timing. Yeah, I got it, and yeah, and then I got rid of it before everything happened because we bought the house. So I don't know. Maybe that's not a complete win.
No, man, that's no. I think yeah, I think the wrong way to look at investing is like number go up, and it's always about like what kind of life are you trying to live? And if like at the end of the day, like my dumb uneducated comment like bought you a house, like I mean, literally, what more can you ask for? So
Yeah, yeah,
so here, man, like the what here's what I'll say about crypto, and like I didn't enter this conversation like hoping that you join our little cult, but I would like love if that's the end result. But back in 2018, when I was like really thinking hard about leaving Anheuser-Busch, and like when I ultimately did, I'll never forget. I said to one person, the head of the beer garden in St. Louis, and I said to her, I was like, "Look, I just feel like everything that I've done at this company has been like managing something that's falling apart, and like everything is on its way down, and like it's just like filling holes and disaster crisis, and like I just like I really want to like work on something where I feel like I'm building something and I'm growing something and like I'm trying to achieve something. And like what she said to me was, Rex, this might not be the right company for you. And like for me, like that blew my mind because like this is like a super senior person at the company who like I couldn't believe could ever say something not positive about the company that they work for. But like what I've like taken away from that was like I spent like the next however long like looking for a job and like trying to find something that like would not have that problem, you know, and that like I would like really be enthusiastic about like going to work, like not because like I cared about the people or anything, but because like I like needed that company to succeed. And like you know my story, you know how many like different like jobs and like different places I looked at. Like the first time I like really felt excited each day to like get closer to the future was like when I found Ethereum. And so again, like for me, I like I'm such a doomer these days. Like I really live in this world that's like falling apart, and like whether it's because of like the war in Europe or like our own domestic problems or like this like you know like World War III that's like looming over Taiwan or like literally anything. I didn't even mention the pandemic because like I feel like that we're over that, right? But um like there Ethereum is like what it you know is us still moving forward, and like that's not it's
Yeah.
not the only place where that exists, but like I do think it's the only place where like it exists, and like you are not only welcome but encouraged to like walk up to the group and like help in whatever way you can.
Yeah, and I think, and I think, thanks for sharing the personal story there. And frankly, I left Anheuser for the same reason, right? I think I I was looking for the opportunity to get back to building, right? So we sort of both came in through the innovation track, and then we both found ourselves in different parts of the company. And eventually, most of the company doesn't. They're not thinking in like net new capabilities and building. They're just it's either status quo, maybe you're optimizing, more often than not you're fixing, and it's such a drain. And I left for the same reasons, and that's why I went to a startup, because there was a lot of excitement there. It was new to the world in a lot of ways. It was a new place, a new city, a new everything, and yeah, just the excitement to build was totally there. And so same thing for Ethereum, right? I understand the excitement of building something, and then just the undertones of this being potentially so good for the world is also something, at least for me, that's become increasingly important, right? Because it's like, of all the things I can go to work and do every single day, why am I doing the thing I'm doing? Is it just for me? Is it just for financial gain? Is there something more to it? I haven't found the something more yet, right? I'm getting there and I'm caring more and more. But just my point being, I think your message totally resonates with me, because I think that's the same excitement that I'm looking for.
Yeah. No, yeah, man. And I think that's part of at least the American condition, and might be more broad than that. But like the word that I used with that executive was like my job has since I started here has always been managing the decline, and like I think that's what it means to like largely live in our society. And like with Ethereum, I feel like that is so far off the table. Like what decline? Like we haven't even started yet. And so for anyone, yourself included, that's looking for that kind of like spark to life, like the great part about Ethereum is like you can start getting involved without quitting your job. So with that, what I'll say is, Chris, thank you so much. It was such an honor, and I really appreciate you just letting me lecture you about the cult that I've found, and I hope you enjoyed your time.
Yeah, it was a pleasure being here, and thanks for putting up with my I don't know, lack of knowledge here.
No, please. You're perfect. You're perfect. All right, man. Thank you so much. I'll talk to you soon.
All right.